Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to my session about part of my desktop. This is going to be a purely presentation where I will be showing you all the best practices and my experiences that I learned and gained over a year and a half of working with part of my desktop. And I was working with as well Win Automation before part of my desktop and with Nintex RPA before Win Automation. So I went through at least three platforms. Just had a very small experience with Blue Prism, but I didn't do any project in Blue Prism. So I just know how the interface looks like and how to make some small clicks. All right. So my name is Tomasz Poszytek. Come on, slide. Don't be shy. I'm coming from Warsaw in Poland. I'm business applications MVP, and actually I'm focusing on workflows, on processes, on business processes, on automation. So this is the kind of a field that I'm trying to and this is mostly what I'm doing for my everyday work. If you'd like to connect with me, you can either scan code or go to aka.ms/Poszytek, and there you can find all the hyperlinks to YouTube channel where you can find a lot of content around RPA, but not only, and LinkedIn and Twitter and whatever. So, all right, let's go to the agenda. So first, I'll go briefly through what the RPA is, because at least two of you has no experience with RPA at all. So it's good to know what RPA is and to be on the same side. Then I'll go through the story behind part of my desktop at Microsoft, so like how this application actually appeared, and then through those best practices. Can you just remind me, Frederick, how much time do I have? Is 45 minutes or 55 minutes?
45 minutes.
Okay, I'll just try to do my best to fit that time. So first, the history. So I mentioned that RPA is not that really new, and that is because like the whole technology that is RPA using right now was the invention of this technology started around 60s of the 20th century, and the major breakthroughs that now the RPA is using was first the invention of machine learning, and then the invention of natural language processing, and lastly, the software or the capabilities of screen scraping. So with that, RPA is not only smart, it's not only understanding what we are trying to tell, speaking about bots, but as well is able to read what we see on the screen. And this is the major information or the major factor or the major feature that RPA is using, because without that, it wouldn't be simply aware what and where to click. And so the whole story behind RPA as a software started around 21st century or even the end of 20th century. But actually, all the major competitors of part of my desktop were founded around 2003, 2005. The Win Automation, or the Softomotive, the maker of the Win Automation that Microsoft has acquired, they started their journey, I think, around 2007. Nevertheless, between the moment that the software was created, that it hit the market in the first place, and before it really hit the mainstream, it took like over 10 years to really be here where it is now. Whatever. So the main reason why RPA is now so popular and is really in this mainstream is that around 2015, but even before, companies started this shift and started the migration to clouds, started to use cloud services, started to use cloud applications, and started to integrate their processes and their workspaces over the endpoints, digital endpoints like REST APIs and other kind of APIs. And then they realized that they still have a lot of applications working somewhere on the servers, on the premises, on desktops, which should be included in the workflows, but they can't be because they don't have any APIs apart from user interface. And so RPA is this, well, some people call it a technological debt, others call it a cluster, but the goal is that the RPA is simply now the platform that helps to combine these two worlds, so the on-premises, the legacy old applications with the new modern cloud solutions. All right. So, as mentioned, RPA can sometimes be called a technological debt because we are simply trying to fill in the gaps we have in the technology instead of simply creating new technology. This is just going to be bigger and bigger debt, but I don't really think it's a kind of a debt because when speaking about debt, it has to be something that we can manage. I mean, or not manage. Nevertheless, with RPA, this is a fully manageable solution and administratable. Oh gosh, such a hard words. The goal is that RPA is not something that is created and is left aside, but is still living, is being developed, upgraded, and well, it helps really to fulfill those requirements that companies have today. And there is as well a number of benefits around RPA, such as with the RPA, we are able to provide the higher quality services. We can as well increase agility in the processes. Plus, we can save money because we can move the employees we have to a more demanding tasks, to more engaging tasks, instead of hiring new ones. And instead of hiring new ones, we can simply purchase licenses for RPA, which are way cheaper than the full-time employee. And we can make our employees more happy because we are moving those repeatable, boring tasks away from them, and the bot is simply making them for us. All right. So when speaking about RPA, there are like two flavors, two modes that RPA is working. The first one is attended, which is mostly like a personal mode where the bot is running on the machine that the user is signed in and is automating tasks for the user. And the second one is unattended, which is more like an enterprise one where we have orchestration, where we can scale up number of machines running in parallel. And this mode is flavor is mainly meant for those processes which can run on the virtual machine somewhere in Azure, for example, that don't necessarily need a human agent to supervise them. Plus, for these processes, which really requires a lot of machines to run in parallel at the same time. Wow. Okay, so in Power Automate, or maybe in Power Platform, we have a situation that Microsoft is calling now hyperautomation. And why? Well, because the Power Automate platform itself is now built from like 3 pillars that allows us automation of mostly anything in digital world that we can think of. So first of all, with the AI Builder, we can create AI models that helps us to automate documents, images, files in general, so that we can put as well those files into our workflows, so that workflows are able to read information stored in those documents and process this information through the logic. Secondly, the long and loved on the market Cloudflows that are made to help us automate interface applications having interfaces, so APIs, and that is called the DPA, so Digital Process Automation. And for that, we have over 600 of connectors, including those connectors in under the Independent Publisher program that was launched last year. And lastly, for the legacy software that is running somewhere on the servers, we have as well the UI automation, so the RPA that is using the user interfaces. And so with these 3 pillars, Cloudflows or the Power Automate is really able to make a very end-to-end, or you as a designers are able to use Power Automate to make end-to-end workflows, which are really connecting various of endpoints and help you to build your business logic in the cloud. Right, as said, number of connectors is really high, so just keep that in mind. I will get back to that in a moment because that's important information. And so when speaking about Power Automate Desktop, that's the information I told you. It can be considered as a plaster or as a bridge that it helps to just get information from the legacy of the applications and to bring them to Cloudflows, so that you don't necessarily need to replace your old software with a new software, because if the old software works, then why you should combine it or workflows using the RPA. So the main benefit of using Portable Desktop is that once Microsoft acquired Softomotive in 2020, they first let us to use WinAutomation, which was quite okay-ish, but it had no integration with Cloudflow. So you were able to call WinAutomation RPAs from Cloudflows by using some workarounds. And after it was like not even a half a year after they acquired Softomotive, Microsoft announced Portable Desktop in December during Ignite 2020, and it wasn't a whole new program, because it was just WinAutomation with a new skin. So instead of black and orange colors, it was now dressed up with the grays and blues. But the major switch, or the major upgrade from WinAutomation to Portable Desktop, was around its integration with the cloud. So right now, all the information that Portable Desktop is collecting during the run is saved in Dataverse. It has a seamless integration with Cloudflow, so you can simply put an action in a Cloudflow that is triggering the Portable Desktop. You have an option to exchange data between Cloudflow and Desoflow by using input and output variables, and so on and so on. So this is really now a seamless integration and helps you to accomplish a very a variety and wide range of scenarios that you need that you have to. All right, so let's go through those challenges and insights and best practices that I want to share with you. Now, first, and the most important thing I want to share with you, and just put that in your heads, is that whenever it's possible, use DPA, because RPA is really maybe not vulnerable, but it's not always errorless and precise, and it won't work for years without issues. And that is because RPA is working on a desktop, so it is really impacted by a lot of factors that can occur on a desktop, like an application that pops up instead of the other application, or that once you upgrade the software, it will have buttons in different locations as it had before, or that some labels changes or titles are changing, or whatever, the machine is turned off, or that there is a user session on the machine and the workflow has to be run in unattended mode. So the goal is that whenever you can, you need to think about your solutions and try to use those over 600 of connectors, instead of just thinking that, okay, I can have RPA, so I'll use RPA to first access SharePoint, get data from SharePoint, then open Excel, get data from Excel, and then possibly open that SAP and write this all data into SAP. But instead, you should think what options, what actions you can do on the Cloudflow side, and then just take data, pass that data to RPA, and only complete these actions that you cannot do with Cloudflows with Desoflow. And I think even speaking about SAP and, for example, JD Edwards, so those were the two biggest applications I was automating, is that they as well have their digital endpoints. So even SAP that is running on premises can be automated through SAP ERP connector, because they are BAPIs, so the programmable layers that SAP delivered, or RFCs, which is remote function calls that can be developed by SAP developers. And those can be used like an interface to the SAP, or the endpoints to SAP. And those can be called from the Cloudflows without a need actually to execute RPA. So that connector is premium, of course, but in a moment you decide to use RPA, you need to have a premium license anyhow, so it's not the point. The second thing is that you can as well build OData endpoints in SAP. You can do that even for SAP HANA. So if you have a cloud version of SAP, there as well you can create endpoints using OData and exchange information through REST APIs. So that's really a lot of things you can do with SAP without using RPA. And for example, speaking about JD Edwards, there is a tool called Orchestrator that allows you to record actions that you're doing in that ERP. And then once that recording is done, it is generating as well an HTTP endpoint that can be called so that it is being invoked and executed inside JD Edwards. So again, this can be simply called from the Cloudflow instead of running RPA. Okay, so these were the most important information in the beginning. Just use DPA, use Cloudflows whenever possible, and really think twice before starting to implement RPA solutions. But if you have to implement RPA solutions, then the next slides are really about those best practices and challenges that I was facing, and I'd like to share with you so that you don't follow my mistakes, sort of. So the rest of the presentation is split in 3 parts. First is about building bots, then about testing bots, and finally about running bots. All right. Hopefully it will work this way. It will working now. Right. First of all, when you're building a process, you need to think about its logic. We have a couple of options to make the logic more understandable and easier to read for not only you, but as well other developers that will be possibly working on your workflows. So whenever you can, just try to isolate the pieces of the logic in the Desoflow that can be reused. And so, for example, if you have a scenario where you're signing into an application or doing some operation on another application, and like these couple of steps are being used by more than one Desoflow that you're building, then you can use a sub-processes. So like create a separate Desoflow just for signing in, and then you can call that Desoflow from your Cloudflow. Sorry, from your other Desoflow. So first, you need to extend or open the run flow section of actions in Desoflow, and then put that action to the logic of your Desoflow. Simply then provide the input variables that are defined in that other Desoflow, and then get outputs. The goal is that this way you'll have like one Desoflow. So let's say responsible for a specific set of operation or actions, and then whenever there is a change in that logic, you simply need to update it in a single place, not in all those RPAs that you have built, which are just doing the same piece of logic. The same thing if you're building a Desoflow and that Desoflow has a piece of code or the logic that is reusable or that repeats over and over in the same Desoflow, then you can use subflows to isolate it into, it's something like a function in programming, right? So you can use subflows and then just move some of this logic to the subflow and then call this subflow multiple times from different places in your Desoflow. So here again, under flow control, you need to add this action to run subflow, then choose the subflow you want to run, and then simply the Desoflow is going to navigate to the other subflow, execute its logic, and then go back to the main logic in the previous flow. So, all right, now use comments. So whenever you're building a Desoflow, there is going to be a lot of actions that you'll put possibly, and it's not always easy to understand or remember what this logic is behind or what you wanted to achieve with this set of steps. And so the same as in programming, you need to write comments so that either you or someone who will then take over your work it will be then easier for them to understand what is going on in this logic. So just put comment, write comments, make them as much descriptive as possible, and then it will be really useful for you and for others. Next thing is to name the selectors. So at any time you're in RPA, you're recording selectors. So those UI elements which RPA has to either click or write in them or press them or select them or whatever do with them. their names are very hard to understand, like what is the selector behind, because they're just following the class name or the identifier of that UI selector. And like in this example, this button BTN, MNT4, NGTNS, CDB, whatever, is just not descriptive. So once you put that in the Desoflow logic, then it's really hard to remind yourself where the bot is actually clicking. And even though this selector is always supplemented with a screenshot, it's not that easy to find out what is that specific selector behind. So the better thing is to simply go to selectors and then to rename them to something more easy to understand and to remember. Also, I remember handling errors. So there are a couple of ways to handle errors in Power Automate Desktop that you have to use and that you have to remember. First, the error handling can be done on every action level. So you have to double click an action, then in the left bottom corner of the action settings, you have this on error configuration. And in there, you can define how this action should behave if an error occurs. So you can then either configure to try to retry. You can say that the flow should perform some steps before it fails, or maybe it would simply continue because maybe that action, even though it failed, is not that very important and can be, and the whole logic can simply proceed. Once you're done with the configuration, you'll see that the action that has this error handling on has this small shield left to its row number. The other thing you can do is to navigate to flow control section of actions and drag and drop the unblock error. Now, the unblock error's benefit is that the single action configuration, the single actions error configuration can only catch a specific errors. I mean, those specified errors. For example, when launching new Microsoft Edge, it will be able to catch an error, for example, that the URL doesn't exist or that the Edge didn't start. However, if you have a set of actions that you want to catch errors for, or if you know that this action, the specific action, can fail with an error that cannot be caught on the action level, then you need to use the unblock error. And there is as well this option to capture unexpected logic errors. So with that, you'll be able to really capture any kind of errors that will occur within the block. So it is really useful if you don't know what can happen within the action. So that's kind of a try-catch in programming. Now, I encourage you as well not to use recorders, because in Power Automate Desktop, you can either record steps that you want to perform on an application with a recorder, or you can simply grab UI elements and then build the logic yourself. With the recorder, the downside is that apart from those actual steps that you want to record, it is recording every activity you're making on a desktop. So, for example, whether you move an application, whether you expand the application, whether you just click somewhere where you didn't want to click, all these activities are being recorded. And once you put them into the application, so like once you finish the recording, you just have a long list of different steps which you don't necessarily need. Plus, the UI selectors which will be recorded this way might not be very precise or might not be possible for the RPA to discover later. So what I encourage you, just don't use recorders. Try to use, try simply to grab the selectors on your own and then build the logic as well on your own. Now, when speaking about selectors, don't use those selectors which were really grabbed by either recorder or by the UI selector recorder. Yeah, that's the other thing, because they are always absolute. So they just target an UI element which is on the interface at the moment when it was recorded. So for example, if it had a value XYZ, then the selector might as well use that value as a piece of the path. And then if the value changes, selector will not work because it won't be able to discover that element anymore because there will be nothing under that path. So instead of using those selectors that are just recorded, go always to a selector and see if you're able to make this selector more generic. So for example, instead of using equal to on a class, maybe use starts with or ends with. Because, for example, on the websites, sometimes elements have different classes when you hover them, and then if they are not hovered. And so when you're selecting element with this add UI element feature or recorder, then at the moment it is reading its class, it is hovered. So this way it may fail as well, or maybe contains. Plus, you're as well able to put variables into selectors. So if you have a situation where you have, for example, a table and each row has an ID starting with a number like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then you can as well put you can create a variable that is then going to be incremented by a loop. And this variable can be as well used in a selector so that the ID is going to be dynamically generated. As well, remember to remove unused UI elements. So during your designing, during building of the Desoflow, you will be possibly changing the way you think this Desoflow should work multiple times. Or you'll be finding a better way to achieve the same set of steps or the same logic. And you'll find yourself in a situation that on this right side in the UI elements list, there will be a lot of elements whereas only some of them are going to be actually used. And so the best practice is to simply click that arrow next to add UI element button, and in there select option to remove unused UI elements so that it will be really clearer for you to know that only these elements which are actually used in a Desoflow logic are left. And right now I'd like to move to this set of, let's say, best practices around automation of the applications. So the first or the most straightforward way to automate an application is to simply grab the UI elements like the buttons, text fields, images, radio boxes, and so on, and then use actions to, for example, click, type, select, change option, and so on. Sometimes, or even very often, these actions may fail because the field is like not available or it's hidden below the visible screen, or for hundreds of other reasons it may fail. So instead of always trying to click on the UI elements, you can try to find out and so-called like out-of-box solutions. And one of them is to use keyboard shortcuts. For example, in SAP, nearly every button has its shortcut that you can use. The same thing in Excel. So you can just use and send keys to the application instead of clicking on the interface. And another thing, even better, is to use scripts to automate. In SAP, you can use VBA. On the website, you can use JavaScript, of course. In Windows, you can use, for example, Python or PowerShell. And that is the best way how to automate applications, because that is the most supported as well by the applications, and is the most precise, as this is just executing a logic of the script, not trying to really press things on the interface. So as you can see here, we have like a couple of options. We can use DOS commands, we can use VB scripts, JavaScripts, PowerShell, Python. And speaking about SAP, we can simply navigate to the recorder in SAP, then record actions that we want to actually perform in SAP. And once that is done, SAP is generating us an VBA file that we can simply open, copy the contents, and paste it to the run VB script action in Power Automate Desktop. And this way, it will be not only executed much faster than clicking on the interface, but as well much more reliable than clicking on the interface. And last thing, if you're just beginning automation, if you're just starting to automate a new application, then instead of maybe trying to build an RPA ad hoc, you can first try and see if the application can even be automated by using an application called Inspectexe from Windows Software Development Kit. And with that application, you can simply hover over UI interface, over the user interface of an application to see if specific UI elements are actually discoverable and available for the for the inspect to be selected. If they are, then RPA is as well going to be able to do that. So this is how it works. All right, that was the first section. Do you have any questions so far? I don't see anything in the chat window, of course, but maybe someone would like to unmute themselves and ask them verbally. All right, if not, I'm just going forward to testing the bots right now. So this is the second part of those best practices and lessons learned. In Partomate Desktop, we have like 3 types of testing. So the first one is the simple debugger or the debug mode, where we simply hit the RPA to run in front of us with the designer opened. The second one is the test in attended mode, and that can be performed either from the cloud or as well from the local machine. Well, and the last one is the unattended mode, so the one which is running somewhere on a virtual machine in the cloud. Each, of course, has its pros and cons. However, for the beginning, you should start with the debugging. And I was speaking about the debugging. You need to know about the breakpoints. So whenever you try to debug and you'd like to stop the RPA on a specific step, you need to press that small space next to the row number, which will add the red dot, which is a breakpoint. And that's the same like in Visual Studio, if you're a developer or in possibly any other IDE. The goal is that with that you can simply stop the logic on the specific step, and then you can either continue the run by clicking the run, or you can just perform the run next action so that the workflow will go to the next action and stop there again. Again, when speaking about the debugging, the very useful thing is to operate or to change the run delay value. So by default, it is set to 100 milliseconds, I think, but you can change it between 1 millisecond and even 10,000 milliseconds. So if you'd like to give RPA, or if you'd like to give yourself more time to see what RPA is doing between the steps, then you simply need to make this run delay value higher. If you just want to, if you just want the RPA to move quickly through actions, set it to 1 millisecond and it will be fine. Okay, the next thing I want to let you know or share with you is that RPA is logging its runs, but the logs that RPA is doing automatically are just on actions level, so that every action executed is being logged. However, you might want sometimes to log some additional information, like the variable values across the run, or screenshots of the desktop that will tell you what was the status or the state of the application at the specific moment. And so I'm doing this usually using Excel, and in Excel just writing new lines every time I want to log something. But you can as well use like Notepad or any other database solution of your choice. This is useful because later, for example, if the RPA is running in unattended mode, it is sometimes really difficult to understand why it failed, what happened on the machine at the moment it failed, and so on. So the quite good as well option is to make your own error handling approach, and to as well read the get last error, use the get last error action that is hidden under the flow control action block of actions or group of actions. And this will return you information why this flow failed. So logging that is going to give you some more additional information around the context of the failure. Well, the same, the screenshots, as I said. And well, this is an example of the log subflow that I'm using. So as you can see, in every run, it is simply writing a set of information to Excel. And I'm using that nearly, maybe not at every action, but at most of the actions where I want to save some additional information around the context of the user operation. Okay, then speaking about the logs, as said, the logs are being written to Dataverse. However, they are first being stored on the local machine. So once you navigate to current users app data folder, then to local Microsoft Power Automate Desktop, there you will find a folder called scripts. And in that folder, there is a set of folders with names following GUIDs, which are GUIDs of desktop flows. And in the desktop flow folder, you will find a folder called runs. And in that folder, again, you will find a list of folders with GUIDs, like the names of the folders are going to be GUIDs. And those are going to be GUIDs of the specific instances. And once you open such an instance folder, there are going to be two main files, the log and the JSON run definition JSON. And these two files are actually containing information, the actions log about all those actions which were executed during the run and their values, input information, output information. And the run definition JSON is going to contain information about the instance itself, so like when it was executed, how long it lasted, if it failed, then why it failed, and so on. And in the end, this information is also transferred to Dataverse, and it can be accessed by navigating to monitor. However, you might just want sometimes to go through these files on the server just to have them displayed in one file instead of clicking on every action. Okay, and last section is about running bots. I still see no questions or no one wants to unmute themselves. Or maybe you have some questions. No, no, no. All right, no, no means no. Okay, the first thing about running bots is the screen resolution, which is really useful quite often. So when you're running in attended mode, or maybe first the unattended, then by default it's running in HD resolution, so 1920 pixels per 1080 pixels. But you can change that in Microsoft Flow RPA config file. And that file is going to be updated every time you will, in the UI Flow service as a config, That file is going to be replaced or overwritten every time you install a new version of RPA. However, for the moment that you have a specific version, you can simply edit this file and change the values so that unattended mode is going to be opened in a different screen resolution. Then speaking about the screen resolution for attended mode, for that you can use actions to get and set screen resolution. So if you set that action as the first in the Desoflow run, then obviously before it executes some logic, it will simply change the resolution of the screen to the specific one. And that might be as well important in case you are recording an application or Desoflow on one machine which has some specific resolution, and then you are sharing this workflow with your colleague or with or deploying to another machine which has a different screen resolution. But because you're, for example, using some absolute coordinates to click on specific UI elements, therefore you need to set the screen resolution to the same one as you are using on the machine where you are authoring the bot, so that it doesn't fail in the target environment or in the target machine. Now, I mentioned already the Desoflow runs monitor. That's the tool, the single place where you can have an overview of how the flows, the Desoflows in your environment are performing. So here you can find the list of all executed Desoflows with the information about their status, so whether they were succeeded, failed, or maybe they are still running, or maybe they are queued and waiting for the execution. And this is also the place that if you click on the date or the timestamp of the Desoflow, you will be navigated to the details of that instance. And this is simply the same JSON that I showed you that you can read on the server, but here it is, let's say, dressed up with the user interface where you have all those actions displayed. And then if you want to find out what happened in a specific action, you just need to click it. And as well, if the action failed, or if the whole bot failed, then here you'll be as well able to find out the failure reason. And the failure reason is very, very often supplemented with a screenshot. Not always, but usually. And this screenshot is very useful for you, of course, because it helps you to as well understand what happened at the moment where the bot failed. All right. Now, another thing that is very useful around running bots and getting lots of knowledge about their performance is to deploy the Power Platform Center of Excellence. And in COE, there are also options that that will help you to understand how the RPA is running. So first, you'll see the general information about the RPA in your environment, like how many you have them, what platform they are using, by whom they were created, and so on. Plus, you'll have the information about the errors, which is, I think, the most important analytics. So here you will find why your bots are failing and what are the most common failure reasons and so on. And this is as well very helpful for you to debug and to make your bots run better. Another thing that you have to keep in mind is that you need to use those secure inputs and outputs both in Desoflows, but as well in Cloudflows. So in Desoflows, you're able to mark specific variables, both input, output, and flow variables as sensitive, and this way their values won't be visible in logs. However, when you're, for example, obtaining values from Key Vault, from Azure Key Vault, and you want to pass them to Power Automate Desktop, then as well, just remember to go to settings of that specific action and to mark those two options, so to secure inputs and outputs. And this way, even if someone accesses the instance, the run details of the specific Cloudflow, they won't be able to preview what was the value, for example, taken from the Key Vault and passed to the bot, because it will be displayed as secured with this information that content cannot be shown due to security information or configuration. So this is a very important thing to remember when your Cloudflows and Desoflows are processing sensitive information. Right, and that's just another information from the Desoflow perspective. So when you're doing editing a variable or creating a variable, you're able to mark them as sensitive, and this way that value is not going to be visible in logs. This is just going to be escaped with asterisk X's. All right, one more reminder about DPA. So do as much as possible with Cloudflow. So again, when you have a workflow that has to first get data from, for example, SharePoint, then read-write something from Excel, then try to do as much as possible on a Cloudflow side using the Cloudflow connectors. And only those steps which are really not possible to be done with a Cloudflow, then do with RPA. But really think, try to think out of the box and do as much as possible with Cloudflow. All right, and one more reminder about handling errors. So the reason behind error handling is not only that your flow is going to be more or less sensitive to all the issues, but the worst thing I remember from working with processes with customers is that those moments where customer is calling me telling, hey, I think this flow has failed because I'm waiting for like 2 hours and it didn't send me that email, and it should, because usually it's being completed in like minutes. And then I'm actually learning that indeed the flow is either failed or suspended. So handling errors gives you that information, and that can deliver you proactively information that your bot failed or your Cloudflow failed, and that you can act before the business reaches out to you and tells you that it failed. So what you can do is not only to configure this desktop, this error handling on a desktop site. So here you can use the action configuration, the unblock error, and then to use your own logic to handle these errors. For example, to take a screenshot and send you an email with that screenshot at the moment the subflow fails, but as well use Cloudflows and in Cloudflow try to implement the try-catch patterns, or at least run after configuration, so that if the Desoflow action fails, or if any action in your Cloudflow fails, then as well send yourself any kind of an email that will inform you that something went wrong. And then you can either resubmit it before business actually realizes something went wrong, or you can fix it, tweak it, whatever. Just be able to act proactively. Also, when speaking about RPA and the Power Platform as a platform, use ALM. So try to design your bots and Cloudflows on the developer environment, in the developer environment, and then once you're ready, once you have tested it on your own and you want to move it to business, then, for example, create a test environment, then create a prod environment, and then export those solutions as managed and import to test environment, prod environment, but just use managed solutions. Don't manipulate them once they are present in a target environment, because this will just break this ALM and create those unmanaged layers, which is always a pain when you're trying to deploy a new release of your solution. I haven't tried myself to use DevOps and to automate ALM in Power Platform. I know this is somehow possible to create those pipelines and to automate the life cycle of solutions in Power Platform, but it's still something I need to learn. And last thing, before you upgrade Power Automate Desktop version on production, test it on test or dev machines, because I already learned a couple of times that new releases of Power Automate Desktop are not free of errors. I already find myself in a situation where I accuse Microsoft of not doing regression tests, or maybe doing them with me as an end user. But I just face situations when an action that was really working fine in previous releases, in new release was not working, it was failing. And so I had to rebuild pieces of the workflow to work around some logic, because it didn't work. And what is very important, once you upgrade to a new release, you just can't roll back. Plus, if you save a workflow, you save your Desoflow with a new release, you can't run it with an old release, neither you can open it with an older release. So before you upgrade, just test if this new release doesn't contain errors and won't break your Desoflows. So wrap up. So remember, Power Automate Desktop RPA is not the answer to everything. It's not really. It's not really. I mean, it's vulnerable. It can fail for a variety of reasons that can happen on the desktop. So whenever it's possible, just try to use DPA and Cloudflows, because it's always better than RPA. Try to think out of the box about your solutions and be creative. So not try to build RPA very straightforward. Try to think of shortcuts, keyboard shortcuts, scripts, moving maybe some of the logic splitting the logic between Desoflows, and then call them one another. As well, remember about ALM. So plan the architecture of your environments, have environment for dev, test, and prod, and never work directly on prod unless you really have to. Deploy and configure COE, so the center of excellence, because you will face as well in a moment in time that your business is going to ask you about the efficiency of your Desoflows, or about your Cloudflows, or just some general insights, and COE is there to give you that information. And implement error logic at every level, so both Desoflows and Cloudflows, because it will really save you lots of not pleasant moments. And right, so just one last information. If you want to learn more about RPA, I highly encourage you to follow me on YouTube. This is the URL in the bottom. And if you'd like to start playing with RPA yourself, but you haven't yet had a chance to, then I encourage you to go to aka.ms/RPA in a day, where you can download RPA in a day labs, where there are like 10 labs helping you to understand what RPA is from the very, very beginning until quite complex scenarios as well. I made it.